So hi everyone, thanks for joining this Provar What's New webinar. For those of you that might be new to Provar, this is a regular webinar series that we run on a regular basis. And it's a great webinar to be at if you are already using Provar on a day-to-day basis, or if you're interested in hearing about what we've recently delivered and what we're looking forward to delivering this year. So we'll start off some introductions then. My name is Hetty Borman-Weston and I'm Head of Marketing here at Provar. Presenting with me today, I'm very pleased to welcome my colleagues Michael Daly and Richard Clark. And I'm also very pleased to welcome to the webinar Sarah McCarter. Sarah's joined Provar recently as a Salesforce subject matter expert, and she's bringing many years of Salesforce experience into the business. So Sarah will be on the call today in case you have any questions around the latest Salesforce features. And we will have time for some questions at the end of the session. You'll be hearing more highlights from Sarah in future webinars, so welcome, Sarah. In terms of today's agenda, if we take a quick look at what we're planning to cover, we're going to start with Michael showing us some of the latest changes in Provar 2.0. We've got a new UI to show you and some other new features. And then Rich is going to take us through some of the most relevant updates to Spring 20. And then he'll be taking a look at some of the upcoming Provar roadmap and what we've got planned in subsequent releases. At the end of the session as well, we'll have some time for Q&A. And if you would like to ask a question at any point during the session, you're very welcome to do so. The best way to do that when it's during the content is to type it out into the questions box. And I'll be keeping an eye on these and making sure that they get picked up at the end of the session. In terms of timings, we expect the webinar to last about 45 minutes, and I'll make sure that the recording is sent around to everyone tomorrow in case you'd like to watch it again or share it with your team members. So finally, before we get into all of our content around Provar 2.0.3, I'd like to acknowledge the slightly bumpy road that some of our users may have had with unexpected Salesforce changes in Spring 20 sandboxes. So if you are an existing customer, you will likely have received a few emails from me recently concerning the status of these issues over the last 2 weeks. We've been communicating pretty regularly around 2.0.3 status, as we've noticed Salesforce making a lot of changes to Spring 20 which weren't present in pre-release testing. So we are continuously upgrading our Spring 20 support to keep it in line with Salesforce's changes and patches. And we released a new version on Monday the 13th with support for Salesforce's latest change. Unfortunately then, Salesforce has deployed a further Spring 20 patch on the 14th of January, which has fundamentally changed some of the app launcher behavior. So this doesn't impact all tests, it's only those that rely on changing Salesforce application from the one that was last used by the Salesforce user account under test. So we've already released a patch file for this issue for affected customers, and we'll be rolling this into an updated build of 2.0.3, which is just subject to our internal QA. So I'll make sure that an email notification is sent out as soon as this is available via our customer community. And then we'll keep you up to date via email of any further changes that Salesforce makes that are likely to affect your tests, and we'll work on providing support for Salesforce changes as quickly as possible. So with that being said, if you are interested in getting a little bit more early visibility of Salesforce releases, we do continue to work with Salesforce product managers, architects, QA, and release managers to get that earlier visibility of releases. So if customers have been impacted by these issues, they can consider applying for the Salesforce Provar BST program, which allows you to participate in pre-release testing ahead of Sandbox preview. So this is a pilot program that we have with Salesforce, where Salesforce will run your tests during Salesforce's official pre-release testing. We won't go into more information about that on today's webinar, but if you are interested in learning more around the eligibility criteria for that program and how you can apply, there's a link on screen now that you can take a picture of and follow. So do check that out if that's of interest to you. Okay, so that's it from me for now. At this point, I will hand over to Michael to start us off.
Thank you, Hetty. I'm going to be going over some of the Provar 2.0 changes. You'll notice a lot of UI changes, but there's a lot of features that we've added in as well, and as well as the features that we've rolled into the test builder. So I'll be showcasing some of those through some slides, and then I'll actually give you a hands-on demo of what that looks like. So starting off with some of the UI changes that we've had, So in the Provar desktop application, we've added a new perspective called the Provar 2.0 perspective. Now you'll notice this whenever I go into the demo, but essentially we've just reorganized the tabs for better navigation and a more user-friendly interface. In addition to that, we've added support for a dark mode inside of Provar desktop. So previously we only had the light theme, now there is a dark theme to go along with that, and I will show you how to toggle back and forth between those two modes. In addition to the new modes, we've had some new icons. So for those of you that have already upgraded to the new version, you may have noticed this already, but I'll highlight those just briefly whenever I go into the demo. And there's also a new execution modes along the top side of Provar. So whenever we show the new desktop application, I'll highlight what the differences are and what things you can take note of there. And we'll talk more about the test palette as we get into the next slides. So the test palette, the running theme for Provar 2.0 is to move a lot of the functionality from the desktop application to the test builder Chrome extension. And so you'll notice that as an ongoing trend going forward, as well as currently. So some of the functional changes to the test builder that you may notice in Provar 2.0 are that we've added a lot of the test palette features into the test builder. And you can see an example from the screenshot here. And I'll also highlight some of those whenever we get into the demo later. We've also added a lot more functionality around editing your test steps inside of the test builder. So previously you had to kind of toggle back and forth between the test builder and your Salesforce UI and then the Provar desktop application if you wanted to add steps and then maybe go back and edit them at a later date. We've added a lot of more support for editing your test steps inside of the test builder so that way you don't have to go back and forth now. Aside from the functional changes, you'll notice some of the UI changes. So there's also a light and dark mode for the test builder. It goes along with the dark mode for the Provar desktop application. And I'll preview just briefly how that works when I show that later. Also, we've added a new, or we've combined rather the pause and resume button inside of the test builder. Previously, these were two different buttons. So whenever your test was executing, you would see that pause button highlight. And whenever it was paused, you would see the play highlight. However, now we've just combined it into a single button, so there's no confusion there. Now going on to some of the new functionality in Provar itself. So previously, when you were trying to use row locators for accessing rows inside of a table, you had to use either a predefined variable or some kind of static text. Now we allow you to use functions inside of row locators. So for instance, if you're looking for a specific row that has a specific date value and you want to use the date format function, here's an example of how you might do that now in the new Provar. We've also extended our support for handling UI alerts inside of Provar. So previously you only had the support for adding expected messages with the exact message being present. Now we've allowed you to customize how you want that comparison to be. So maybe you're just looking for a contains, so that way you don't need the entire string of the UI alert, you only need a portion of it. So this allows your test case to be more robust, so that way you're not looking for a big long string that's always going to be the same. You can make it a little shorter, and this allows you to change that in the future and not break your test cases that are built on these UI alerts. To go along with the new Lightning lead conversion, we've added support for the fields inside of the convert lead page on Lightning pages. So if you want to add those fields, whether it's to a contact, an opportunity, or an account, you can add the actual interactions for those fields directly inside of the Provar application now. Previously, these were only doable through page objects. So we've added support inside of Provar 2.0 for that. Okay, so that's just a highlight of some of the changes. I'm going to jump into the Provar application now to give you a demonstration of what that looks like. So this is Provar 2.0. You'll notice that the test palette, which was previously called the test APIs on the right side of my screen, this has been moved to the right side, and then we have our navigator still on the left. So this is part of the new perspective, and the way that you can switch perspectives, if you go to the view in the top right, you can switch between the 1.9 and the 2.0 perspective whenever you're using the new Provar. If you switch to the 2.0 perspective, it will by default enable the dark theme, as well as move your tabs to what you see now. I'm currently using the light theme, but I still have the tab set up. Aside from that, we've also grouped the test runner and test settings, and you'll notice that the problems tab has been moved. So there is no Problems tab on the left side. However, you can still choose to view it if you want and move it wherever you want. The top side of your screen will probably be the biggest changes in terms of the icons. So all of these are new icons. It's still the same functionality. So if you were previously using test environments, you can still access those in the same way. Test cycles are still being supported. This is the new symbol for those. And then we also have our Chrome browser and browser selection and the resolution selection are still there. In terms of the execution modes that I mentioned earlier, so you'll notice the only thing that you see across the top now is the test builder. If you just click the test builder icon itself, it will open the test builder for whatever test case you have selected. If you want to run it in a different mode, you can select the drop down and do a run debug or run under Ant. Now, quick note on run/debug, this will enter your test case into a debug mode, meaning it will pause at all breakpoints and if there is an error. So if you just want to run the test case through to the end or to the failure point, you can right click on the test case in the navigator and select run test. So just a brief difference there and highlighting that. Aside from all of those icons, you'll notice that a lot of the test palette icons have changed and been regrouped into different sections. For instance, the data interactions, so anything interacting with a database, a web service, email service, all of those are contained inside of the data section now. Previously, they were separate sections, so maybe you were looking for those and you weren't sure where to go. Now it's all grouped under the data section to be more user-friendly and more contained. And if I scroll down further, we've also grouped the utility sections at the very bottom. So previously we had a read and write for file interactions, and then we also had a string comparison section. This has been combined into the utility section, which contains those string operations and the file IO as well. All the rest of these are the same, and it's worth noting that if you are using any custom APIs, you can rename them and put them in whatever section you want. I actually have a custom API here that I've named string operations, and where I have a convert case custom API written for that. And any custom APIs, along with the control elements, the utility, and the UI interactions, will all be visible inside of the test builder. So when I show that demo in just a second, I could highlight those. I'll pull open my test builder window now, show you what that looks like. So the Salesforce UI will be the same, of course. However, the test builder, you'll notice on the right side of my screen, right now I've currently selected the dark theme. You can switch back and forth if you wish to go to light theme. You could switch it here. Personally, I prefer the dark theme, a little more easy on the eyes. Now, if you want to interact with the test palette from the test builder, we've added the option to do that here. So if you select test palette, it'll bring open the window where I mentioned before, all of the control elements will be there. For those that are not there currently, we're always going to be adding more to this. So the ongoing theme, like I mentioned, is to move a lot of the functionality from the desktop application to the test builder. So that way you don't have to go back and forth between applications to do your testing. Also, you'll notice my custom APIs listed here. So any custom APIs that you do write will be listed in the test palette. Now I want to give a brief highlight onto some of the feature changes that I showed you in the previous slides. So for example, using a function to access a row inside of a table. So if I go to the opportunities page, this particular test case, I've already created an opportunity via the API. This is the opportunity that I've created. So if I want to right click and add this to my test case, so as I mentioned previously, you could of course use the row locators that have always been there, or you could use a variable or predefined value. Now we've also opened that up to use functions inside of your row locator. So if I don't want to use a very specific date here, I can look for a function. So I'm going to type in the date format function, and I'm actually going to add a couple days to today's date. I'm going to add 5 days, and I want to format this according to the format that's listed there on the page. So this will select the row as expected, and we have it using that format function there. So you can use functions inside of your row locators if you wish. If that's something that you were missing before, we've added that in. Now also to highlight the new handle UI alert feature. So if I go to delete this record, which I'll go ahead and map that. Now, of course, when you delete a record from Salesforce, you will get that alert on your screen. Okay, so now I want to add something to my test case to handle this UI alert. So I'm actually going to use the test palette to do that. So let me bring open my test palette window. And inside of UI, you'll notice we have the UI handle alert function. Now, like I mentioned previously, this was only set to equals for the comparison type. You could only look for the exact message. Now we've added some more support for that to make it more dynamic. So let's say I only want to look for a message that contains the word opportunity, for example. I can do that here, set the comparison type to contains, add and do. So it's going to handle that UI alert for me, and it's going to accept it, so the opportunity was successfully deleted. I'm going to swing back over to my slides now, and from here I will pass it on to Richard, who's going to talk more about Spring 20.
Thank you, Michael. That was excellent. So I hope everyone enjoyed that as much as I did, seeing some of the new features the team have been hard at work building. So I want to talk to you about some of the features of Spring 20 that will affect you as QA teams that you'll be interested in. Some of them you may have spotted yourself in the release notes, other ones may be more subtle. And then I'm going to proceed to talk to you about the Provar roadmap for 2020. We'll give updates throughout the year on new features as we develop them, but I just want to give you a heads up about what our core themes were and what you can expect to see soon from us. One feature that Salesforce have provided in Spring 20 that's very exciting directly affects QA teams. Now in Winter 20, a long needed feature was provided by Salesforce so you could clone one sandbox from another sandbox. Prior to Winter 20, you could only do that from a production org. That was a great feature because it allowed you to have a set of test data within one org and then spin up another sandbox and have exactly the same copy of that test data. However, prior to Spring 20, that second sandbox had to be the same version as your production org. With that restriction removed, that means you can now use sandboxes as part of your sandbox preview testing and have a org that's within Winter 20 and an org within Spring 20. Using the power of Provar, you can run the same test cases across both of those orgs, and it really allows you to highlight differences between that excludes any changes your own developers are making. So I think that's a really, really powerful feature, and I recommend you all adopt it as soon as possible. Another feature, which I think is really exciting, is something called Data Mask. So this was a big announcement at Dreamforce. And Data Mask is a feature that allows you to either mask, generate random values, or remove data when you do a sandbox clone. Now imagine that your source database was from your production org, and you want to create a sandbox of that, but you still want represented data that is meaningful, that isn't really test data as such. What you can do with Data Mask is you can set some configurable rules on a field by field basis to anonymize that data to eliminate any sensitive details. So quite important for things like GDPR compliance and other compliance rules. So I think that's again a really exciting feature. It's one that I was hoping to build here at Provar, but as Salesforce have delivered it already, that means that's one less task for our development team. If you're interested in Data Mask, rather than contact us, if you contact your Salesforce account executive or customer success manager, I'm sure they can provide you more details about availability for your particular org. Another often overlooked feature of Salesforce is they give us advance notice of some of the features. In terms of critical updates, you may also people refer to these as CRUX. Now, critical updates eventually become auto-activated within an org. So if you go within the Salesforce org and you go to the setup, and in the setup search, you type critical updates, you'll see a list similar to the one here. Now at Provar, we test as many of these as possible for you. However, even when we've tested these updates, that does not mean it won't affect you. That means it didn't affect any of our test orgs. So it didn't affect our example applications. It didn't affect any of our test scenarios or any of our code. It does not mean they won't affect yours, depending on the features your developers and administrators have configured. Now, the great thing about critical updates is, one, I can see when these things are going to be auto-activated, so I know the priority of things I need to test. I can activate and, in most cases, deactivate that change before it becomes mandatory, and that allows me to run a Provar test case or test plan to provide regression test results either to Salesforce to alert them that a change they're planning is destructive towards your application, or to your own Salesforce development team to let them know that they need to plan some changes to comply with the activation. And I think that's a really, really powerful thing for QA teams. One particular change I'm going to call out has actually been postponed to summer 20 and only really affects customers at the moment who acquired their Salesforce org or activated their org since spring 18. So that's quite a small set, but it was 2 years ago, so anyone in the last 2 years. Now, this is regarding the behavior of Apex controllers. So apologies for those who aren't developers, but at the bottom of the screen there in the picture, we have a Apex class, and that Apex class is providing data back to an Aura component, so they're Aura enabled. What I would expect that to do based on that signature is it will return a list of accounts. Now, within Salesforce, you'll be familiar with the concept of data or record sharing. So a user can only see the records within an object that they're permitted to see. With this class within Winter, well, as it is now, without activating this critical update, it will return me by default all the accounts, I can only assume, depending on the query that's inside it. So it does not obey the sharing rules of that org. After this update is switched on, it will respect that. So the results you may see in your test cases, you may see a Lightning component or Aura component that has no data. You may see an Apex or Aura exception in the form of a server error, or you may just see results different to those that are within your test case. So this is a great example of where the critical updates really allow you to add value to your Salesforce team and your business users and make sure that these changes aren't going to be destructive. The solution to this is your developer needs to explicitly state whether that class has with or without sharing to make sure you get the desired functionality. A less exciting feature is one that Salesforce have released originally within Winter 20. So we have the concept of standard objects in Salesforce, and some of those standard objects for many, many years had no way to customize them. Within Winter 20, we got the ability to add custom fields to some of these standard objects that couldn't be changed before, and I think that was a great advancement. That's reduced the need to maybe customize or replace things that come out the box. Within Spring 20, your Salesforce admins and developers can now implement a business process around these objects that utilizes those custom fields that have been created. So you may not already have test coverage for opportunity contact roles. If your Salesforce implementation team are planning to make use of this feature, please liaise and make sure you've got your appropriate test coverage for the contact roles to make sure that's included as part of your test plan. In a similar vein, account and opportunity teams were modified in Winter 20 to have custom fields, but you were able to customize the fields that appeared in related list, but they weren't displayed. Within Spring 20, those customizations that an admin makes to a page layout related list are now visible. Now, if you were already testing account and opportunity teams, you may find that the columns that appear in your sandbox for Spring 20 are different to the columns you had in your Winter 20 org. That's not an error on Provar, it's not an error from Salesforce, that's a deliberate change. So you may need to revise your test cases to check for those fields. Or again, if you're not testing this today, you may find your admins making changes or your developers making changes that you want to test. And so in this window below, I've added a division and a notification checkbox, and I might want to add test coverage for the setting of those values to make sure the desired outcomes occur. At a more technical level, within Salesforce Classic, there was a feature called URL hacking. Many Salesforce consultants were aware of this. It was a great way to pre-populate fields in a form when you hit the add or new button to preset some values. So within Lightning, it's not been possible to do the same feature. The URL hacking in Classic was an unofficial feature. That is, Salesforce never officially supported it and always notified that at any time this could stop working. The great news for Salesforce developers and admins is URL hacking is now an officially supported function. So I can create magic buttons and links which will open a new form in Lightning and have some of the values pre-populated. So the example below is a formula field for the account object when we calls the new function, and in that you see default field values passes a comma separated list of field names and the substitution values I want to provide. So that's something your Salesforce implementation team may start to adopt. It's something to be aware of because you may want to make sure you test it, and you may want to make sure that the form fields they're passing in that URL are secure and not exposing sensitive data. The last item I want to talk about in Spring 20 is a knowledge article that Salesforce published on the 4th of January. And this knowledge article was aimed at test automation tool providers like Provar and end customers who had their own test automation frameworks using things like Selenium. And what this knowledge article does, it helps customers that are trying to test Lightning Web Components by providing a tool for helping to create your own custom Lightning Web Component locators as XPaths or as JavaScript locators. That can also help Salesforce Provar customers that have written their own page objects to do their own XPath locators using Aura. So if you're having problems with your own custom page objects and they've changed now from rendering in Aura to rendering in Lightning Web Components, then this article will give you a tool that helps you generate a working locator. Now, it's really important I say working locator. That's a locator that works with Spring 20 only. And I would say that locator is not robust. So the locator it will generate you will be deep linked or hard coded to the parent component tree. So if I have a tab, and in that tab I have an accordion section, and I have a detail or custom component in that accordion section, the locator will only work if you don't move that component around. Our recommendation is to always use suggested Provar locators, which are more robust. So when a Provar locator is offered to you, we ensure that if that component is moved, if its parent tree is changed, then that test will still pass. We'll still locate that element, regardless if it's moving around the page, unless you want it to fail. We are introducing a feature I'm talking about in a few minutes called By Salesforce. So we're adding a new locator that works across Aura and LWC. And when that's available, we do recommend you start migrating it and using that, and we'll be offering that as a default choice when mapping components in Lightning. So let's look at that roadmap in a bit more detail. When it comes to Salesforce releases, we have the 3 Salesforce releases per year, spring, summer, and winter. And that starts initially with a pre-release window. So the pre-release for Spring 20 started on December the 9th. And as part of that pre-release, we had iterative updates and patches and changes within that. And the pro team have access to that pre-release. BST program customers also have access to that pre-release. And it enables you to do your own regression and smoke testing with changes on, I wouldn't say it's a stable release, but changes that Salesforce are planning to make to Sandbox Preview. On the 4th of January, Salesforce released their Sandbox Preview for Spring 20. So that affected some sandboxes. And if you're interested to know which of your sandboxes get upgraded to Spring 20 and which get upgraded to remain in Winter 20 and how you can affect that, there are knowledge articles from Salesforce to do that. And within that, Salesforce have then been rolling out weekly patches to Spring 20 in preparation for them putting the Spring 20 release in production starting from the February the 8th. Now, I know a lot of you use this window to do your own QA on the Sandbox Preview, to do your own regression testing. And as Hetty alluded to earlier, we are seeing constant changes from Salesforce, and our development teams keep up those changes as quickly as possible. And I do recommend you make sure you stay using the Provar Success community, understanding the patch updates we provide, and any other version updates we can provide to you. If you're interested in understanding which Salesforce dates affect you, then there's a website link at the bottom, status.salesforce.com. Within there, you can enter the pod number, so something like NA57, CS101 that you're using, plus any other my domain. So for example, if I put Provar in there, it'll tell me when the Provar org is going to be updated. In addition to Salesforce releases, we also see Chrome updates. For example, we're expecting Chrome 80, which is currently in beta, to come out on around the 4th of February. Again, if you're interested in what's in those Chrome releases and how they might affect you, there is a features and a schedule page for the current Chrome feature in development and the next Chrome release that's being planned. The next Chrome release, we have a date. Beyond that, we can only assume they're approximately every 6 weeks. The good news is Provar does work with Chrome 80. You don't need a Provar update 2.0.3 for Chrome 80 based on the beta version, but you will need to update your WebDriver, and we'll provide further comms around that towards the end of the month. Now, as part of Provar, Michael's done an excellent demonstration of Provar 2.0, which is the start of our journey with Provar 2. We have lots more changes planned throughout the year. And across the top there, I've highlighted the dark arrows with our recommended releases. So those are generally tied to a particular Salesforce release, especially if you're using Lightning. Customers using Classic can generally use older versions of Provar without any problem. But to stay up to date with the latest features of Salesforce, we do recommend you stay on the current recommended version. In between each recommended version, we always like to provide 2 optional releases where we can trial out or provide to you new features and enhancements that either you've requested or that we've planned to release to you. And I want to talk to you now about some of those planned changes we have for the rest of the year. So our theme for 2020 is foundation of reliability. And I'm going to talk more about some of these initiatives that we're doing, so don't worry about taking a screenshot of this slide. So that reliability will give us a base for which we can do more with Provar, test more, and improve the overall reliability you have in terms of the tests that you run, the speed you run them, and the results you get out. On top of that reliability, we're going to focus on content. Now, that isn't necessarily changes to our product. That includes things such as updating our website help. So we've had feedback from you around whether the help is for people that are looking to buy Provar, people that want to understand how to use a certain feature, or people that just want more information on how to do a certain activity, so more how-to guides. We've taken that on board, and the team are busy working on some updates that I think will really help our users. We've also been focusing on our in-app help. So you saw already in the demonstration Michael gave, if you hover over a palette item in Test Builder, it will give you a description of what that does. We've also added more help to the functions and the drop downs within Test Builder as well. So we're trying to provide more and more help to you about how to use certain features in Provar, and we have more changes planned. I'm also pleased to say that we're planning to release Provar certifications this year. So this is a program still in development, but the idea will be you can earn your credentials for using Provar as either a new user or an expert user. That also assists our success team when you contact them, because they're speaking to someone who's maybe just used Provar for the first time and had a training course, whether you're an expert user. So make sure we reach to the right resource to assist you with any inquiries. On top of all this, with the reliability and content, user experience is really important to us. So we're going to continue to extend Test Builder to reduce the clicks you have to make in order to create a test case or to create a test step, to edit a step. We're going to improve execution logs. We're going to have a simpler version update mechanism. So I want to dive into some of these features in more detail. So coming very soon, ideally in the next 2 releases, you'll start to see some enhanced test login. So the intention here is within the test runner to have more control over the log levels you see in the test runner, and also to have more control over the format and output of test results that you want to share with your users. We're also looking at the messages themselves to make sure that the readability of those log messages aren't just designed for our development team in order to diagnose issues, but actually suitable for what you need to know as well. to know that when you see a exception, is that an exception because there's a defect, or is that an exception because the application has failed to navigate to the correct component? So some exciting changes coming there in the next couple of releases. I'm also pleased to say this has been a very requested feature to have updates to our patching feature. So at the moment with Provar, we provide a full build for every release. We'll continue to do so. And we also provide a update for any Windows users as well. The patching and updating will make it much easier for us to roll out to you specific patches, but also to let you roll them back as well once you don't need that patch release. We'll still do some full releases because often it's quicker to do a full install than to apply, say, 3 or 4 patches. I'm really excited with our enhancements for Lightning Web Components. So you'll see a new by Salesforce or Salesforce by locator appear in the next couple of releases. So we're supporting all the Salesforce LWC based components, and we're supporting Aura components as well. The intention there is a locator should be independent of whether you're executing as Aura or Lightning Web Components, and really effectively tie back to the metadata of the field or button or link or tab that you're trying to test. Eventually this will supersede Aura by, but that doesn't mean you have to make changes. So any Aura by locators used today will continue to work for the foreseeable future. We'll just make them execute as Salesforce bys instead. And then, as already mentioned, Chrome 80 beta, the only change is to update the WebDriver, and we'll send some more comms on that before the end of the month. Coming later in the year, so ideally around the Salesforce Summer 20, before that or shortly after, depending on Salesforce's own release roadmap, there's a feature at Dreamforce got a lot of attention called Dynamic Forms. Now, Dynamic Forms is a way in which you can take your existing page layouts and you can choose to migrate them into multiple detail components. Now, previously, you were able in the Lightning App Builder to have a detail component, but only one detail component for that record on the page. You can have multiple detail components for different records, but only one for the same one. This feature of Dynamic Forms will allow you to migrate a page layout and its sections into different areas of a page and structure those components. I think that's a really exciting feature, and it's something that you're definitely going to want to test. We're expecting Salesforce potentially to release that for a beta in summer 20. It's currently available for pilot. Provar support is dependent on Salesforce releasing to us the metadata coverage for that. So it's all well and good that being there, but we need the metadata access to map that intelligently without page objects. And we believe Salesforce should release this. Apologies that I've put winter 20. What I meant, of course, was winter 21. I was losing track of it, rolling over. The other feature of Dynamic Forms that's really exciting is that the visibility of those sections and the visibility of those fields, instead of only being reliant on a user's permissions, will also be controllable by other related field values. So for example, if I was testing an opportunity detail section and the opportunity was closed won, I might enable the purchase order number field. And I can do that just through configuration without requiring code, without requiring a developer to build anything for me. I think that's a really exciting feature, and I won't need a record type and lots of page layouts either. Within Test Builder, I've already talked about adding additional controls, but I also want to expand that out so the same debugging and variable inspection you get in Provar Desktop is available to our Test Builder users as well. So after we complete the login changes, hopefully to release to you some changes around the variable inspection so you can walk through as you walk forwards and backwards in Test Builder, just like you can on Provar Desktop. In terms of Salesforce Mobile, we're still awaiting guidance from Salesforce on their recommended test automation for the new Lightning Mobile application. But they have announced that the browser access for the original Salesforce Mobile experience will end with the Summer 20 release. So we can expect to hear something in the next 3 months about that. I want to conclude now as we come to the end before Q&A. So just a reminder, if you have any questions, please post them in the questions box of the GoToMeeting. I want to talk to you about the changing scope of Salesforce testing. So when I started using Salesforce in 2008, the things we had to test, the combinations, was quite limited in terms of a user had a role and a user was entitled to see records based on sharing rules as well. And I could test that quite easily. And a user was defined by the combination of their role and their profile. And then within the Salesforce application, what fields people could see on which screen was controlled mainly by page layout, and I think record types was around back in 2008. It feels like a lifetime ago. Later on, Salesforce introduced a feature called permission set. And permission set added the ability to extend a profile for a specific user to have additional permissions. This actually made QA much harder because rather than testing for a specific type of user, such as a sales admin or a sales operations or a service consultant, so on and so forth, marketing user, you had alternate permissions to consider as well as part of your test coverage. Within the Salesforce profiles, some of the problems that have occurred is that it really mixes metadata about what you can do and how the system is configured with system and application permissions, and even security of what people can do, what their IP login restrictions are, so on and so forth. They've also, profiles have a unique deployment behavior. So anyone that's tried to deploy changes from one sandbox to another or one org to another would have stumbled across the problem that they cannot move a profile itself. The profile only impacts the items that you've moved from one org to another. So you can make a profile change in one sandbox and you want to change that permission in another. You had to also move across the thing it was you changed. So if I change the account object permission, I had to include the account object in my deployment for the permission changes to come across. So that's quite difficult. It also wasn't packageable, and any Salesforce consultant can tell you horror stories about organizations they've seen, Salesforce organizations, which suffered from profile proliferation. I managed to say that without stumbling over it. So we went to an org and saw 90 or 100 profiles, but really there are only 6 users or types of use in that org, but every user had a number of combinations with a number of extended permissions. Bring this more up to date in recent times, Salesforce has added even more ways and variations to an application. So they added something called device types. So a flexi page can be for a specific device, so phone or desktop. Remember, desktop includes both tablet and a normal Windows or Mac desktop. And something called component filters. So a Lightning component is visible, again, based on rules about the system, about the user permissions, or about other field values. In Spring 20, that's been expanded further with permission set groups. Permission set groups are actually a really good feature because it removes the problem of those permission sets I talked about that came in 2012 and allows you to group them together more like a profile. Unfortunately for us as QA people, this has increased the list of things I need to be aware of when I'm testing the number of scenarios even further. In terms of the future though, I think the future is quite bright. We're going to see a convergence of some of these features. So things like permission sets and groups, I believe, are going to supersede most of the features of a profile. So in future, our test cases will be more based around those permission set groups. The dynamic forms and actions will give us a way to migrate away from multiple page layouts, multiple record types, and ultimately reduce the number of configurations I need to do and the number of users I need to do to test that that feature is working as intended. And then things like component filters become refined as what we call visibility rules, where I can have very clear visibility rules about whether something appears via a user's permission, via the type of device they're using, or via another field value. And that includes both buttons and links. So I think that's quite an exciting convergence that's coming. Okay, just to finish, if you're wondering where Provar 203 is, just a reminder that's available on the Success community. Provar.com. If you do not have a Success community user and you're a Provar customer, then please do get in touch via success@provartesting.com. Within the community, you'll find there's a section called releases, and there's also a downloads link, I believe. And within there, you'll always find the latest version. So it's always the best place to find the latest files. With that, Hetty, I think we're concluded. Any questions?
Fantastic, thank you, Richard. So yes, as Richard says, we're going to go to questions now. If you'd still like to ask a question, then now is your opportunity to go ahead and type that out into the questions box, as we have some time spare. We have had a number come in already though, so I'll kick things off with the first one, which says, where can I download Provar 2 from? So I can take that one. If you're an existing customer, as Richard mentioned, it's available in our new Provar Success community. If you're a prospective customer, then you likely won't have access to that community, but we can make trials available for a limited time using a pre-installed instance. So if that's of interest to you, then visit our website, and from there you can get in touch with us to find out a little bit more. The next question is from Michael, and it says, is there anything I need to do after upgrading to Provar 2? So for 1.9, we had to re-import our workspaces.
Good question. So it is worth, once you upgrade to the latest version, rather, you will want to go ahead and reset your perspectives to whatever they were. Or if you want to switch to the new perspective, you can do that, but there will be no need to re-import or export your projects to the upgraded version of Provar.
Fantastic, thanks, Michael. The next question is for Richard, and it's surrounding the new Handle UI alerts feature. So the question says, hello guys, the webinar is very useful. Addition to the UI alert feature is a wonderful update. Does the new option also allow us to respond to the UI alert with other options apart from only OK or cancel?
That is a great question. I don't believe so. I know sometimes the OK and cancel, so let me just explain. The OK and cancel are actions that the alert can have. Sometimes the OK and cancel say something different. So that could be a different language, or it could be a sure and no way. But behind the scenes, they are by action an OK and cancel button. If I had 3 buttons, the answer is no, but I think that's a really good suggestion. And I do welcome, we talk about raising things through the Provar Success community. We also want to hear your enhancements. We also want to hear your feedback, but thank you for that. But I believe you can map it. It may not be sensible ways, but the OK and cancel also can be translated into other terms. But I'd have to check if we've supported renames of those, but it's the action of OK and it's the action of cancel.
Fantastic, thanks, Richard. And the final question that we have, unless anyone wants to get in quickly, are you going to be getting rid of Provar Desktop? Do you want to take that one, Richard?
Yeah, so making it seem like everything's through Test Builder, absolutely not. There are some very valid reasons why you'd still use Provar Desktop. You still want to be able to drag and drop from the org browser to create records. If you're testing web services, doing that API testing, then the fastest way to do that is still through Provar Desktop. And actually, some of our users only use Provar Desktop. They don't need to use Test Builder. They're able to build tests very quickly just using the existing interface. So no, there's no plans to get rid of that in the coming year.
Lovely, thank you. So that's all the questions that we've had come in. So we're going to wrap up this session now. As I mentioned at the beginning, we have been recording this session. So I'll make sure that the video recording is uploaded tomorrow, and I'll send an email around to everyone who registered in case you'd like to watch it again or share it with anyone else on your team. So finally, I'd like to say thank you again to our presenters today, and thank you to all of you for making the time to attend. Bye for now.